Welcome to our deep dive into the design of everyday things by Don Norman.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to be looking at excerpts from this book and
It's really
kind of breaking down.
it's a classic.
That is,
It's like the Bible of design.
yeah, and it's interesting too because it's one of those books that
No,
everybody
yeah.
references, but like how much have people actually read?
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
So
I mean, it's very influential.
yeah,
And rightfully so, I think.
yeah. So we're going to be going through and really taking a look at some of the core ideas that he lays out about how design impacts our everyday lives.
Yeah, he really kind of opened our eyes to how much design really does impact us,
Right.
in ways we don't even realize.
Absolutely. I mean, before I read this book, like if I struggled to use a door or like figure out a faucet,
Oh, yeah.
I just thought I was the problem.
Right.
But Norman makes a really compelling case that it's often the design that's failing us,
Yes.
not the other way around.
100%. And he even uses the term psychopathology of everyday things
Oh, yeah.
to describe this kind of like frustration that we experience,
Yeah,
when we're trying to use these objects that just don't seem to work right.
totally. And he illustrates this so perfectly with that story about his friend getting trapped in the post office doors.
Pushing and pulling.
Yeah,
Looking like an idiot.
totally. And meanwhile, everyone else is just like breezing through.
Exactly.
And it's like, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
You get that feeling of being totally defeated by like a simple doorknob.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is this isn't just about doors.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
He talks about like confusing faucets,
Oh, gosh.
car radios with a million buttons.
Those are the worst.
Yeah. Have you ever encountered an object that just felt like it was designed to make your life harder?
For me, it's those overly complicated TV remotes.
Oh, yeah.
You need like an engineering degree just to change the channel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the real takeaway here is this, that we tend to blame ourselves.
When objects don't work intuitively.
Right. We think we're the dummies.
Yeah.
But
Norman's point is it's often not us.
it's the design
It's the design.
that's failing to meet our needs.
Yeah. Exactly. And this all comes down to like the way our brains work, right?
Yes.
We all have these mental models of how things should work.
Yeah, our assumptions.
But if the design doesn't align with that mental model,
Right.
we end up lost and frustrated.
You run into trouble.
Yeah.
The classic example I always think of is the thermostat.
Oh, yeah.
People crank it up to 90 degrees thinking it's going to heat the house faster.
Oh, yeah. Totally guilty of that.
But that's the logical thing to think,
But
right?
that higher number equals,
Yeah, more heat.
yeah, faster heating.
But it doesn't work that way.
That doesn't work that way at all.
No, the thermostat's just going to turn on until it hits that target temperature.
Right.
It's not going to heat any faster.
So how does this all tie back to design? Well, good design should kind of bridge that gap between our intuitive assumptions and how things actually work.
Yeah, you make the invisible visible.
Exact.
So now we're getting into like one of Norman's most important concepts, I think,
Yeah.
which is the gulfs of execution and evaluation.
Yes.
These are the mental hurdles we have to overcome when we interact with like anything.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. The gulf of execution is that gap between what you want to do and what the object allows you to do.
Okay.
And the gulf of evaluation is figuring out whether what you think happened
Right.
is what actually happened.
Did it work?
Right.
Right.
So Norman uses the example of a movie projector to illustrate this,
Oh, yeah.
which, let's be honest, those things were notoriously user-unfriendly.
Oh, they were terrible.
But it doesn't have to be something that complicated.
No.
Think about the last time you struggled with, like, a gadget or an appliance.
Right.
Where'd you get stuck?
Yeah, were you?
Were you trying to figure out how to make it do what you wanted, or trying to figure out if it did what you thought it did?
Yeah, exactly.
So the gulf of execution versus the gulf of evaluation.
And poor design widens those gulfs.
Yeah.
It makes them harder to bridge.
Totally.
And it leaves us feeling lost and frustrated.
Yeah.
Good design, on the other hand, kind of anticipates our needs
Right.
and provides clear feedback every step of the way.
Yeah. So this leads to another interesting idea, which is this interplay between knowledge in the head
Yes?
and knowledge in the world.
Yeah.
So we rely on both our internal knowledge,
Right.
like our memories and our experiences,
Past experience.
and external cues from the world around us to like get things done.
Yeah, we use a combination of what we already know and what the environment tells us to make sense of things.
Yeah. So think about putting together a Lego set.
Okay.
Even without the instructions, You can often figure out how to build it
Sometimes, yeah.
because of like the shapes and the sizes and the colors of the pieces.
Right, the pieces kind of give you clues.
Yeah, those are what Norman calls constraints.
Yeah.
These are like physical or cultural cues that guide our actions.
Yeah,
They limit our options, but in a good way.
right.
They help us figure out what to do without having to like consciously think about it.
Exactly.
But here's where things get a little tricky.
Oh.
Norman also warns about the conspiracy against memory.
Mm.
So in our modern world, we are bombarded with information codes, passwords, instructions,
It's too much.
way more than our brains can realistically handle.
Our poor brains.
So we started relying on the world around us, on technology, on notes, on Google,
Right.
to remember things for us.
We've outsourced our memories.
Totally.
Yeah.
So does all of this offloading make our brains lazy?
That's a good question.
I mean, do we lose some of our own cognitive ability when we rely so heavily on like external cues and information?
I don't know. I think that's a question that researchers are still kind of grappling with.
Yeah, it's something to ponder for sure.
Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, so shifting gears a bit.
Okay.
Norman also has some really insightful things to say about how we make errors.
Okay.
You know, you might think of errors as like a bad thing,
Right.
but he makes the case that it's actually like a normal part of being human.
It's how we learn,
Yeah,
right? We make a mistake, we get feedback, we adjust our approach.
totally.
Right.
But of course, not all errors are created equal.
Right. Oh, of course not.
Some are just like minor annoyances,
Yeah,
while others can have really serious consequences.
that's right.
And so that's why good design
He needs to account for that.
needs to account for human error,
Yeah.
right? Like we need to design systems that are tolerant of mistakes,
Right.
that minimize opportunities for error,
Yeah, make it easy to recover.
and make it easy to recover when errors do occur.
Exactly.
So Norman points out that we often blame ourselves when we make errors,
Right.
but sometimes it's the design that's setting us up for failure.
Yeah.
So he talks about this difference between slips, which are those little automatic errors we make when we're not paying attention, and mistakes, which are errors in judgment.
Okay.
So like if you accidentally hit reply all on an email instead of reply,
Yeah.
that's a slip.
Classic slip.
Right.
Yeah.
A mistake would be like misjudging the traffic and being late for a meeting.
Okay.
One is about attention.
Right.
The other is about judgment.
Makes sense.
But both can be influenced by how things are designed.
That's true.
And so that's where good design comes in.
Yeah.
It can help minimize both slips and mistakes
Right.
by making things clear, intuitive, and forgiving.
Exactly.
It's about creating a world that works with us,
Yes.
not against us,
100%.
even when we're not at our best.
Yeah. Even when we're having an off day.
Yeah, and that's why these seemingly like simple design choices
Yeah.
matter so much.
They do.
They can have like a ripple effect on our emotions, our productivity, our safety.
It's true. They really can.
And this brings us to like one of Norman's core arguments.
Yeah.
Good design isn't just about making things look pretty.
No, it's got to work.
It's about making them work well
Right.
for the people who use them.
For real people.
Exactly.
In the real world.
So he lays out a set of like key principles that designers should keep in mind.
Yeah, the guidelines.
Yeah, things like visibility, making sure that important information and actions are clear. Natural mappings, creating those intuitive relationships between controls and their effects.
Yeah.
Feedback, providing clear signals that actions have been registered and understood.
Right.
Constraints, which we've already touched on.
Right.
You know, using those physical and cultural cues to guide users toward the right actions.
Yeah.
And affordances, designing objects to suggest their intended use.
Right. Make it obvious how to use the thing.
Exactly. And all of these principles kind of work together to create objects and systems that are intuitive, enjoyable to use, and ultimately help us navigate the world more effectively.
I like that. Yeah. Help us navigate the world
Yeah.
more effectively.
Yeah. So we'll dive deeper into these principles in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay. Looking forward to it.
But for now, it's worth taking a moment to reflect on the objects that you interact with every day.
Yeah.
Start noticing those little design details, both the good and the bad.
Be more mindful.
Yeah. You might be surprised at how much they impact your experience.
You really might.
All right, we'll be back in a moment to continue our discussion.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the design of everyday things.
You know, one of the things that really struck me about this book is how it connects design to like our basic human need for control.
Yeah.
When things work the way we expect them to, we
Right.
feel empowered,
Yeah.
capable.
But control.
Yeah, but bad design can leave us feeling like powerless and frustrated.
Oh, totally.
Like we're constantly battling against the objects around us.
You feel defeated.
Yeah.
Nauman calls this learned helplessness.
Well, yeah.
That feeling of just giving up when you keep encountering these objects or systems
Right.
that just seem to defy your understanding.
Yeah, think about the last time you wrestled with a piece of furniture
Oh, yeah.
that came with those, like, impossible to decipher instructions.
I know exactly what you mean.
You keep trying different approaches,
Right.
but nothing seems to work.
And you just want to give up.
And eventually you just give up.
Exactly.
That's learned helplessness in action.
It is, and it's not just limited to furniture assembly.
Right.
This can happen with any object or system that
Yeah.
makes you feel like you're constantly failing.
So if bad design can lead to this sense of learned helplessness,
Right.
can good design actually empower us?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
When things are designed intuitively,
Right.
when they make sense,
Yeah.
when they provide clear feedback,
Uh-huh.
it can be incredibly satisfying.
Totally.
Think about that feeling of accomplishment when you effortlessly navigate a new website
Oh, yeah.
or you figure out a new gadget without even looking at the instructions.
Makes you feel smart.
Yeah, you feel competent,
Yeah.
like you're in control.
Yeah.
And that feeling of competence, I think, can spill over into other areas of your life.
Well.
It can boost your confidence, your willingness to take on new challenges.
So it's not just about the object itself.
No, it's about how it makes you feel.
Right. It's about how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Okay, so now Norman doesn't just focus on like everyday objects.
Right. Yeah.
He also dives into the design of complex systems
Uh-huh.
like power plants or air traffic control systems.
Yeah, those high-stakes environments.
Yeah, and he makes this point that these systems are often prone to errors,
Right.
not because the operators are incompetent,
Right.
but because the systems themselves are poorly designed.
They're not set up for success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he uses the example of the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident,
Oh, wow.
where a series of design flaws and human errors
Yeah.
led to a partial meltdown.
It's a scary thought.
It's a sobering reminder that the consequences of bad design
It'd be huge.
can be catastrophic.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating is how he connects these like large-scale systems
Right.
back to our everyday lives.
Okay.
He argues that the same design principles
Uh-huh.
that apply to a simple door handle
Yeah.
also apply to a nuclear power plant.
Interesting.
So visibility, feedback, natural mappings, constraints, all of these are essential
Okay.
for ensuring that systems are safe, reliable, and user-friendly,
Makes sense.
regardless of their complexity.
I see.
So what can we learn from the design of complex systems
Okay.
that we can apply to our everyday lives?
Good question.
I mean, one thing is like the importance of redundancy and fail-safe mechanisms.
Yeah.
In complex systems, you don't want a single point of failure
Right.
that can bring down the whole operation.
You need backups.
Right.
Yeah.
Like having a backup generator at home in case the power goes
Yeah.
out.
Or saving your important files in multiple places.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about building in those safeguards.
Uh-huh.
So you're not left stranded
Right.
when something unexpected happens. Be prepared.
And we can also learn from the way that complex systems are designed to, like, handle errors.
Okay. How so?
Good design anticipates potential errors
Okay.
and provides clear procedures for recovery.
Right.
It's about creating systems that are resilient and forgiving.
That makes sense.
Because let's face it,
yeah.
humans make mistakes.
We're not perfect.
We're not perfect.
Yeah.
And that brings us to one of the central themes in Norman's book,
Okay.
the importance of user-centered design.
Yeah. Put the user first.
Put the user first.
Yeah.
This is all about putting the needs and experiences of the user at the forefront
Right.
of the design process.
It work for them.
It's about designing objects and systems that are intuitive, easy to use,
Enjoyable to interact with.
and enjoyable to interact with.
Yeah.
It seems so obvious when you say it like that.
Right.
But you'd be surprised how often design seems to forget about the user.
It does happen.
Yeah.
And that's why user research and testing is so crucial.
Designers need to understand how people are actually going to use the things they create.
Right.
They need to get feedback from real users
Yeah.
and iterate on their designs until they get it right.
So it's not just about like sitting in an ivory tower
No.
and coming up with brilliant ideas.
Right out in the world.
Got to get out into the world
Yeah.
and see how people are actually interacting with these things.
Exactly.
Okay. So how can we as consumers
Yeah.
encourage more user-centered design?
That's a good question.
Is it just a matter of hoping that companies will do the right thing?
Well, we can certainly make our voices heard.
Okay.
We can vote with our wallets.
Right.
Choose to support companies that prioritize user experience.
Yeah.
And are responsive to feedback.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to write reviews, share your experiences, let companies know what works and what doesn't.
So we have power as consumers
We do.
to shape the design landscape.
We have a voice.
Now, this leads to another interesting observation that Norman makes about the role of culture in design.
Oh, interesting.
He points out that design is never created in a vacuum.
Right. It's always influenced by the culture.
It's always influenced by like the cultural norms and values and beliefs
Yeah,
of the society in which it's created.
of course.
That makes sense.
Yeah, a design that's perfectly intuitive in one culture might be totally confusing in another.
Totally. It uses the example of like Japanese and American toilets.
Oh, yeah, good example.
What's considered like high-tech and luxurious in Japan
Right.
might seem overly complicated
Way too complicated.
to someone from the U.S.
Yeah,
It's a good reminder that there's no such thing as a universal design.
that's right.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly.
And that's why it's so important for designers to be sensitive to cultural differences
Uh-huh.
and to conduct user research with people
From different backgrounds.
from a variety of backgrounds.
Yeah, the more diverse the perspectives involved,
Yeah.
the better.
Okay, I want to shift gears for a moment
Okay.
and to talk about a concept that's particularly relevant, I think, in our increasingly digital world,
Right.
which is the conceptual model in software design.
Okay.
This is where things can get really tricky
Yeah.
because with physical objects, the way they look and feel
Right.
often gives us clues about how to use them.
Yeah, you can see how it works.
But with software, the underlying mechanisms are hidden from view.
It's a black box.
It's a black box.
Right.
So how do you create a good conceptual model for something that's essentially invisible?
That's a challenge.
It's like trying to explain the inner workings of a clock
Yeah.
without being able to open it up.
Right.
So Norman argues that designers need to use metaphors
Okay.
and analogies to help users understand how software works.
So, like, make it relatable to something they already know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like the desktop metaphor
Right.
that's used in most operating systems.
It's like files and folders.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a familiar concept
Yeah.
that helps us understand how things are organized.
It makes,
But even metaphors have their limitations.
of course.
The desktop metaphor breaks down when you start dealing with more complex concepts.
Yeah, like cloud storage or
Cloud storage.
virtual machines.
Virtual machine, yeah.
Things that aren't actually physical.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's an ongoing challenge, I think, for designers
Yes.
to create these clear and consistent conceptual models for software,
Right. Especially as technology keeps evolving.
especially as technology keeps evolving at such a rapid pace.
Yeah, we have to keep coming up with new metaphors.
And that's why user feedback and testing are so crucial
Yes.
in the software development process.
Right.
Designers need to make sure that the conceptual models that they create are actually understandable
Right.
and usable
Yeah, by real people.
by real people.
Not just engineers.
Now, one of the things I appreciate about Norman's book
Yeah.
is that he doesn't just point out the problems with design.
Right.
He also offers solutions.
Yeah. He's not just complaining.
He's a firm believer in the power of good design.
Right.
To improve our lives.
To make things better.
To make things better.
And he outlines a set of design principles that he calls human-centered design principles. And these principles are applicable to everything from like simple household objects to complex technological systems.
This is the universal set of guidelines.
Yeah.
Cool.
So what are some of these key principles?
Well, first up, we have visibility.
Okay.
This is all about making sure that the relevant parts of a system are visible to the user
Okay.
and that their functions are clear.
So minimizing guesswork,
Exactly.
making it easy for users to understand how things work.
Make it obvious.
Yeah, like those doors that have handles that don't give you any indication
Oh, yeah.
whether you should push or pull.
The worst.
You just end up like awkwardly standing there trying to figure it out.
Just like in that post office story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A well-designed door would have a handle that clearly affords pulling
Right.
or a plate that clearly affords pushing.
That should be obvious. There should be no ambiguity.
Exactly.
Okay, next up we have feedback.
Feedback.
This is all about providing users with information
Okay.
about the results of their actions.
So they know what happened.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's about letting them know that their actions have been registered
Right.
and understood.
So like when you press a button on a website
Yeah.
and the button changes color
Yeah.
to show that it's been pressed.
Gives you that sense of reassurance.
Yeah, you know something's happening.
Yeah.
You're not just left wondering.
Exactly. Feedback helps to reduce uncertainty.
Yeah.
And makes the interaction feel more responsive
And engaging.
and engaging.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about mappings.
Mappings.
Mappings refer to the relationship
Okay.
between the controls of a system and their effects.
It's like cause and effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
A good mapping is intuitive
Mm.
and easy to understand.
Right.
A poor mapping
Leads to confusion.
can lead to confusion and errors.
Yeah.
Remember those stovetops we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where the arrangement of the burners doesn't match the arrangement of the controls.
That's always a fun game.
It's like a puzzle you have to solve every time you want to cook something.
Every time.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a classic example of a poor mapping.
Okay.
A well-designed stovetop would have a clear and logical relationship
Yes.
between the burners and their corresponding controls.
It should be self-evident.
It should be self-evident which knob controls which burner.
Exactly.
All right, let's not forget about constraints.
Constraints.
We touched on these earlier with the Lego example.
Yeah. The helpful limitations.
Yeah, but it's worth revisiting.
Okay.
Constraints are those like physical or logical limitations
Right.
that help to guide users towards the correct actions.
Yeah.
They can be incredibly powerful in preventing errors
Uh-huh.
and making systems easier to use.
So it's almost counterintuitive?
It is counterintuitive.
You think more freedom, more options would be better.
Right.
But sometimes limitations are really helpful.
Limitations can be really helpful.
Yeah.
Think about like the square shape of a phone charger.
Okay.
That only fits into the charging port in one orientation.
Right.
That physical constraint prevents you from inserting the charger incorrectly.
Yeah, you can't mess it up.
And potentially damaging your phone.
Exactly. Constraints can be good.
Constraints can be good, and last but not least, we have consistency.
Consistency.
This is all about making sure that similar functions are controlled in similar ways
Okay.
throughout a system.
So like once you learn how to do something in one part of the system,
Yeah.
you can apply that knowledge to other parts.
Without having to relearn everything.
Yeah, don't make me relearn everything every time.
Exactly. Consistency makes systems more predictable and easier to learn.
It reduces the cognitive load.
It reduces the cognitive load on the user.
Yeah, I like that.
And what's great about these human-centered design principles is that they're not just for designers.
Oh, that's a good point.
We can all use these principles
Yeah.
to evaluate the designs we encounter in our everyday lives.
Yeah, be more aware.
And to advocate for designs that are more user-friendly
Yes.
and enjoyable to use.
We all have a role to play.
We all have a role to play in shaping the design landscape.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the design of everyday things.
You know, it's amazing to think about how much the world of design has changed since Norman first wrote this book.
I know, it's crazy.
Back then, personal computers were still pretty new.
Yeah.
And the internet as we know it didn't even exist.
It's a whole different world.
It's a completely different world.
Yeah,
So much has changed, like, in the tech landscape.
absolutely.
But here's the thing that really struck me.
Okay.
Even though the technology has evolved so dramatically,
Right.
the core principles that Norman lays out in this book are still incredibly relevant.
I think so too.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because at its core, good design is about understanding human psychology.
Mm-hmm. It's about understanding our needs, our limitations, our aspirations.
Yeah.
And those fundamental aspects of human nature haven't changed.
Right.
Even as the tools we use have evolved.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
We might be interacting with touchscreens and voice assistants now,
Right.
but we're still the same humans
Yeah.
with the same basic desires for things to be intuitive, easy to use, and enjoyable.
We still want things to work.
We still want things to work. And Norman talks a lot about the importance of creating a harmonious relationship
Yeah.
between people and the objects and systems that they interact with.
It's all connected.
Yeah, he calls this human-centered design.
Right. Put the human at the center
Put the human at the center.
of the design process.
And this is about making technology work for us.
Yeah. Not against us.
Not against us.
Exactly.
It's about designing things that make our lives easier, more efficient, and ultimately more fulfilling.
I like that. Yeah. More fulfilling.
Think about the difference between a website that's easy to navigate
Right.
and one that leaves you feeling lost and frustrated.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
It can make or break your whole experience.
Totally.
Now, one of the concepts that Norman keeps coming back to is this idea of affordances,
Affordances.
those visual cues that tell us how to interact with an object.
Right. Like how to use the thing.
But in the digital world, affordances can be a bit tricky, right?
It can be. Yeah.
Because in the physical world, the shape, the texture, the weight of an object
Mm-hmm.
often gives us clues about how to use it.
Yeah, you can feel it.
But in the digital world,
Yeah.
we're dealing with interfaces that are essentially flat
Right.
and two-dimensional.
Yeah, it's all on a screen.
So how do designers create those intuitive cues in a digital environment.
That's the challenge.
How do they make it clear what you can click, swipe, or tap?
They have to rely on other visual cues,
Okay.
like icons, labels, animations, changes in color or contrast. It's a delicate balancing act.
Okay.
The goal is to make the interface intuitive without overwhelming the user with too much information.
Without making it too cluttered.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's not just about visual cues, right?
No.
What about things like sound or haptic feedback?
Oh, yeah. Those are becoming increasingly important.
Yeah.
Especially as we interact with more devices that don't have screens, like
Right.
smart speakers or wearable devices. Designers are getting really creative with how they use sound and touch to guide users and provide feedback.
I love that.
Think about the satisfying click you hear when you press a button on your phone.
Oh, yeah.
Or the gentle vibration that lets you know you've received a notification.
Oh, yeah.
Those little details make such a difference.
Totally.
Yeah, they make the technology feel more responsive and engaging.
More alive.
Yeah, more human almost.
And speaking of feedback,
Yeah.
Norman also talks about the importance of error messages.
Oh, yeah. This can be tricky.
Those little bits of text that pop up when something goes wrong.
Right. Hopefully they're helpful.
Hopefully they're helpful. He argues that error messages should be clear, concise, and helpful.
Yeah. Not those cryptic codes.
Not those cryptic codes or jargon-filled messages that leave you scratching your head.
Right. Like, what does that even mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
A good error message should explain what went wrong, why it went wrong,
Right.
and what the user can do to fix it.
Yeah. Give me some actionable steps.
Yes.
To fix the problem.
It should be written in plain language
Yeah.
that anyone can understand,
Not just engineers.
not just engineers. And this ties back to one of Norman's central points, I think,
Okay.
which is we should be designing systems that are tolerant of human error.
Yes, we're going to make mistakes.
Because, let's face it,
Yeah.
no matter how well designed something is, people are going to make mistakes.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable.
Yeah.
So instead of trying to prevent errors altogether,
Okay.
which is often impossible,
Right.
we should focus on making it easy for users to recover from errors.
Yeah. Give them a safety net.
Give them a safety net.
Exactly.
So what are some ways to do that?
Well, think about things like undo buttons,
Yeah.
clear instructions,
Okay.
fail-safe mechanisms that prevent users from accidentally deleting important data.
Right.
It's about creating systems that are resilient and forgiving,
Yes.
rather than punishing users for making mistakes.
Building technology that works with us,
Yes.
not against us.
Exactly.
And in the final chapter of his book,
Okay.
Norman takes a look ahead to the future of design.
The future of design.
And he predicts that technology is going to continue to blur the lines between the physical and digital worlds.
It already is.
It already is.
Yeah.
We're seeing this happening with the rise of smart homes,
Right.
wearable devices, and augmented reality.
It's all blending together.
It's blending together. And this convergence of the physical and digital
Yeah.
presents some really interesting challenges for designers.
How so?
You have to think about how to create seamless and intuitive experiences
Right.
across multiple devices and platforms.
It's not just about one thing anymore.
It's not just about designing a single object anymore.
Yeah.
It's about designing an entire ecosystem.
A whole experience.
And it's about designing for a future that we can't fully predict.
That's a little scary.
It is a little scary.
Yeah.
So what are some of the ethical considerations
Okay.
that designers need to keep in mind as technology becomes more powerful and more integrated into our lives?
Well, we need to think about things like privacy,
Okay.
security, accessibility, and sustainability. We need to make sure that the technology we create is used for good,
Right.
not for harm.
And we need to make sure that it's accessible to everyone,
Yes.
not just a select few.
That's really important.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is.
But I think it's exciting, too.
I agree.
Design has the power to shape the future,
Yeah.
to create a world that's more human-centered,
Uh-huh.
more inclusive,
And more sustainable.
and more sustainable.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. And by embracing the principles that Norman outlines in this book,
Okay.
we can help make sure that the future of design is a bright one.
I hope so.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the design of everyday things.
Yeah.
It's been a fascinating journey exploring the power of design
Yes.
and how it shapes our lives in so many ways.
In ways we don't even realize.
In ways we don't even realize.
Yeah.
I hope this deep dive has inspired you to look at the world around you with a fresh perspective.
Yes.
To appreciate the thought and care that goes into good design.
Absolutely.
And to advocate for designs that make our lives better.
We can all make a difference.
We can all make a difference.
Yeah.
And here's a final thought to leave you with.
Okay.
Remember Norman's point about the U-shaped curve of complexity?
Yeah.
Technology often starts out complex,
Okay.
becomes simpler as we figure out how to use it,
Right.
and then becomes complex again
Uh,
as we add more features and functionality.
yeah, it gets overloaded.
Take a look at your own phone.
Yeah.
How many apps do you have on there that you rarely use?
Oh, it's too many.
Or features that you don't even understand?
Right.
Is this cycle of complexity inevitable?
Hmm.
Or can good design help us break free?
That's a good question to think about.
That's something for you to ponder as you continue your own explorations into the world of design. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.